Well, we're going to have a special update today. I'm going to be speaking with a blogger, analyst from the United Kingdom, someone I've gotten to know recently and respect his views on things, his commitment to the human race. It's the kind of person you'd like to know and talk to. He blogs under the name CryptoRich. We'll have all his links in the description box. And so, Rich, good to have you on.
Yeah, Harley, thank you so much for inviting me on your show. Really appreciate it.
Well, let's start with the big news from today, which I think many people have not heard yet, but there was a vote in the Bundestag in the German parliament today to finalize the election. And for the first time in, I think, since World War II, the lead candidate, Friedrich Merz, lost the first round. And they had to do a second vote. He won the second vote very narrowly. But I'm just wondering, from your viewpoint in the United Kingdom, are you watching the drama unfolding in Germany and scratching your head a little bit?
Well, I'm about scratching my head. I'm kind of I hopeful and enthused by the way that the European Union project, the UK project, to centralize control and have us all eating nothing, owning nothing, and eating bugs is crumbling. And that, all the ploys that they're using to hold on to power are becoming more and more tenuous, and their hold on power is becoming more and more tenuous. So in that regard, I am enthused by it.
Well, and the case is that in your country, in Germany, in France, the governments are very unpopular. In
Yeah.
many cases, they're in the teens, 20%. Merz is now, no, his party is no longer the first party. And of course, with Starmer, I lost track of where he is, but he hasn't gone in the negative numbers yet, has he?
Well, I don't know the negative numbers. He's the most unpopular British Prime Minister since polling started in the UK. And he's uniformly unpopular, horrifically unpopular. And I imagine the same will happen with Merz, because what Merz and Starmer both have in common is a propensity to lie, through their teeth, about I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. They get into power and they do the exact opposite. I mean, Merz saying that they were going to close the border during the election, German election, they were going to close the border and that way securing votes that would have gone to the AfD. And then as soon as he's in power, the election's over. No, we're keeping the border open. Or in the case of Keir Starmer, lying through his teeth brazenly in a meeting with Trump and Vance, saying free speech is protected in the UK. We have free speech. No, we don't. You do a nasty meme, you will be arrested. You will be imprisoned. You could serve 2 years, longer than most people get for a sexual assault against a child.
I think on that case, the UK may be ahead of the European Union in draconian suppression of free speech, although it's going on here as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, on this idea of the coalition of the willing, when you talk to people around you in the United Kingdom, are people really prepared to send their sons and daughters to fight a war against Russia in Europe?
The mood is no, absolutely not. And now one of the things, Harley, that I got to be careful about is I work as a child protection social worker, as I've told you,
Yeah.
and it's an incredibly political endeavor. My degree when I did social work degree many years ago was very, very political, all about the class struggle. But what's happened is that politics it's been captured by the woke identity politics, which interestingly don't include any issues of class. It's all about race and gender and whether someone's man or woman or culture and everything, but nothing about class. That the woke agenda doesn't cover class, and I think there's a reason for that, because if it did include class, it would highlight the political inequalities that the establishment maintains over us, and then there's a risk that people may unite on a class basis versus being the woke agenda being used to divide and rule us into little sectarian pockets to make it easier to rule over us. So I'm careful about what I say within social work. It didn't always used to be that way. We could have free form political discussion. But then there's a whole environment of censorship and of the cancel culture. People
Yeah.
will no longer talk to each other about issues where they disagree on, because it's just so polarized. And obviously, you know, some of the views that I hold, as you will well know, would classify me as a white supremacist. The fact that I believe that we shouldn't have open borders and we shouldn't have people just coming in and being taken care of by the government, even though I'm an immigrant myself, I wasn't born here. Well, obviously I'm a racist white supremacist.
Uh-huh. Well, then let me ask you this then, without getting you in trouble. As you know, we've been very focused on the role of the British establishment as playing a leading role in the hotspots in the world, the wars. You know, the idea that it's all the United States, it's the U.S. empire. We at LaRouche have been investigating the British Empire for years. But I'd like to ask you, as someone who lives there, are people aware that there is a City of London establishment, that the British intelligence plays a leading role? Is this something that people know?
No, they don't. It's all conspiracy theory that you're talking about. And there's just nothing. It's beginning to emerge in independent media, that conversation. I notice on X, it's getting louder and louder and louder. Or it may be the algorithm just playing with me. But there's nothing about it in the mainstream media. There's nothing about it in even sort of anti-establishment discourse within the UK, except on the fringes, you know, all those anti-vaxxers and those, the COVID deniers and those that, you know, didn't wear masks and everything, those non-mask wearing retrobates like myself amongst them. And nobody listens to them because they've been marginalized, silenced, smeared. And you know, I think even what I would say the intelligent opposition, and I include Galloway and his Workers' Party and David Curtin and the Heritage Party, that offer an actual authentic opposition, it's not within their discourse either. Not yet.
Well, now on the question of the Russia, US, the change going on now for normalization, this has been a big topic among the establishment because there's an obvious attempt to stop the US Russian normalization. And that definitely comes from the old British geopolitics, as you know, going back to the end of the 19th century. But is that also not generally known? The name Mackinder or geopolitics, does that not ring a bell with people?
It's not known. There's no mention of it in the Guardian and the BBC. It's
Uh,
just not known. And the way I equate it, it's fish can't don't know that they're swimming in water because it's just how life is. So the antipathy, that the historical antipathy that Britain has towards Russia, well, it's just how life is. And I imagine, you know, for me as a Muslim growing up in Britain, a Pakistani Muslim growing up in Britain, but also living in an area where, you know, I grew up in an area where there was a very large Indian Hindu population. I I could see the hostility between the two communities. And then I go to Pakistan to visit my family, and it's really apparent for that it's exceptional, that it's not the norm. But then when I go, but for the people there, it's just normal. It's just how it is. So they don't notice that. Putin is out to destroy all of Europe, destroy all our liberties. And we are fortunate that people like Merz and Macron and Starmer are going to beat Putin to it and destroy our liberties before he gets a chance.
and the media is so thorough in its protection of the narrative that people don't really know.
They have no idea, absolutely no idea. Harley, there's while the mainstream media and principally the Guardian, the BBC are talking about all the evils of Putin and the evils of Trump, what they're not covering is some of the egregious legislation, the evil, evil legislation that this government is putting through that is completely subverting the relationship between Parliament and people. Like, for example, there's a bill going through now, Parliament now, which would allow cash-strapped local authorities to compulsorily purchase people's homes, land, and property at below market value, and then sell that property at market rates to somebody else.
Huh.
Or the way that I recently did a video where I interviewed a farmer about all the way that the Britain's farming industry is being destroyed. So there is, and it's being done by corporates in alliance with governments. So there's a very large milk company. They are refusing to collect the milk. They're just not collecting the milk from the farmers. So farmers are still milking their cows twice a day and then having to pour the milk away. Now that's lost revenue, but it's also increased expenditure because it takes time and money and effort to milk the cows to produce milk which they cannot sell and get any return on.
Yeah.
Now, there's all sorts of things that the government is doing to destroy the relationship between Parliament and people that just isn't getting covered.
Well, and as you know, one of the things I've been looking at over the years is the role of financialization, which comes from the City of London and Wall Street, has moved against the productive physical economy, which you're just describing with the agricultural sector. The last steel plant in Britain was almost shut down at the last minute. The government nationalized it. Are people not aware that the one-time workshop of the world is now more like a flea market?
I don't think they are aware. Largely, they're not aware because it's been so long since Thatcher financialized the UK, destroyed manufacturing, destroyed the miners. We have what, 40 years now?
Yeah.
Of living inside a financial world, so that financialized world, so that world has gone. Plus, also for a long, long while, we could live under the illusion that this debt was providing a decent standard of living. But that's all. I mean, it's just horrible here. We're getting poorer. There's more and more suppression and censorship, more and more state overreach, and it's just increasing. And the other thing that I think people don't notice is the combined total of all the different pieces of legislation that the government is putting through. So we're being attacked on all fronts. And what's happening, Harley, is so Britain does have a constitution. We're a constitutional monarchy, and it actually does have a constitution, and it's enshrined in several pieces of legislation: the 1688 Bill of Rights, the 1700 Act of Settlement, the Coronation Oath Act. There's also the Law of Due Process from 1368 and the Magna Carta, and they have created a particular environment where in Britain people can do anything that they want to do unless the government prohibits it. And the job of the government, Parliament, so there was a Supreme Court ruling with regards to Johnson proroguing Parliament in order to push through Brexit. And the Supreme Court ruled, or what's been presented, is that Parliament is sovereign. No, not in the British Constitution. The people are sovereign. And that's in the 1688 Bill of Rights, which set up the current structure, which is that the Parliament are representatives of the people, and they cannot produce legislation that is to the prejudice of the people, and that these rights are for perpetuity. However, we're not taught this. We're not taught this in school. They stopped teaching the Constitution to lawyers in the early 70s. So then by stealth, we are being boiled slowly like frogs.
So if you and others decide to oppose the idea of the coalition of the willing, the massive expenditure for upgrading defense, making the British so-called nuclear umbrella, extending it to Europe, if you want to protest that, are you able to?
We are able to, but it's like absolutely under the Bill of Rights, 1688, which is not a law. It's not an act. because it set up Parliament. Parliament didn't pass it. It was an agreement between the people and the king. Except what's happened, that's been obscured, hidden from our view, and then the government have put in more and more restrictions in terms of who can protest, when they can protest, where they can protest. I mean, I saw a Vox camera, a little Vox reel of Palestinian protesters being told by the police that they couldn't protest in favor of Palestine. And the people say, well, could we do a protest in favor of Israel? And the police officers saying, has to admit, yes, you could.
Well, that you bring that up, it's interesting because I read today that I believe yesterday, as part of the victory celebration for the end of Nazism, the defeat of Nazism 80 years ago, there was a march in London. And highlighted in the march was the presence of Ukrainian forces. So here you have the neo-Nazi militia units of Ukraine marching supposedly to commemorate the end of Nazism. And then you have von der Leyen and Kallas from the European Union insisting that no Europeans should go to the Victory Day celebration in Moscow. And then you have Zelensky threatening to send drones at it. So it looks as though the end of World War II has been flipped in terms of Europe.
Yeah.
You have a sense of that.
The victors always get to rewrite the history books, right?
Yeah.
But not even the victors. You know, if you go to Pakistan, and I suppose in India, and you look at history books there's the first battle of Indian independence. And you read a book in Britain, well, it's the first Indian mutiny, the same conflict, right? And that the Russians have been written out, rather the Soviet Union then, they're the ones that won the World War. They're the ones that defeated the Nazis. And then we have this crazy situation where the Ukrainians that collaborated, the Banderistas that collaborated with the Nazis in Second World War Germany, they are now marching to celebrate, to commemorate I just can't get head or tail around it, to commemorate the Nazis, right? We're now siding with neo-Nazis, but we're doing that in order to defeat Russia and get Russia's collateral, get Russia's resources, because the problem with Russia is it refused to cow to the European imperial elite. And that cannot be tolerated, not when it's got $75 trillion worth of resources.
Well, and that also goes back in history to Catherine the Great and the League of Armed Neutrality supporting the American Revolution against Britain. Goes back to the Crimea War, the Great Game, and so on. I wanted to ask you, because you are from Pakistan, what you're looking at on this Pakistan-India situation. There was some initial discussion from Pakistan that they thought there was a third force that might have been responsible for the terror attack. I'm just wondering, have you heard anything on that, or what's your sense of it?
My sense, the third force would be MI6.
Yeah.
Yeah, and acting through proxies, because Britain has a long and ignoble tradition of acting through proxies in order to foment dissent and divide and rule to serve its own purposes. And that attack happened when J.D. Vance was visiting Modi in order to do a deal with Modi. And what they don't want India getting close to the United States. You know, one way of looking at it, one way I look at all macro politics is I reduce it down to a feud between people, where the United States is a person, and Britain is a person, and Germany is a person, and Russia is a person, and they've all been scrapping for years and years and years, and they have long-standing resentments and regrets with each, and unresolved issues with each other. And they're doing what people do in that sort of situation, perhaps as they wouldn't in an office or a playground.
And you see it works. The divide and conquer, the clash of civilizations. And in that context, when we talk about things being turned upside down, you look at the situation with Israel and Palestine, where the Israelis are arguing that it's anti-Semitic to oppose what they're doing, when in fact what they're doing to the Palestinians is what the Nazis did to the Jews. And
or even worse, what the British did to the Tasmanian Aborigines. Hunted every single one down and killed them like they were animals, wiped them all out. And that's what the Zionists are out to do in Gaza.
And what's your sense? Do you think there's a possible resolution for the India-Pakistan before war? I know that Modi spoke with Putin. The Pakistani ambassador to Russia had a long meeting. There seems to be a mediation going on with Russia and China, but we don't hear too much about what's going on from Britain or the United States there to cool things down.
No, I think, well, Britain's not going to cool things down. They're going to stir stuff up. And the US would want India to break away from the BRICS. Britain would want that as well for different reasons, because they want it under each wants it under their own sphere of influence, not as part of the BRICS. And I'm a bit like, well, thank heavens for Putin and Xi Jinping that, you know, cooler, more sensible heads will prevail. Because the last thing we want is a confrontation between the most populous nation and one of the most populous Muslim nations, both of whom being nuclear armed. And Harley, forgive me again, right? I don't know if this is a sort of smart analysis, if this is on a par with the smart analysis of your other guests, right? But Pakistan and India are a couple that divorced. They had this really nasty, acrimonious divorce, and they just haven't got over it. And they are nasty and vicious with each other. I remember many, many years ago being in Pakistan when the Cricket World Cup was being shared between both countries. And the hostility and the xenophobia within each nation was just appalling. Death to India, cried the Pakistanis. Death to Pakistan, cried the Indians. And it was just cricket. So a hot war would be much, much worse. And then plus also, if India's going to cut off the water,
Yeah.
then what choice do the Pakistanis have?
Well, and you see the same thing with the Palestinians when people condemn Hamas and what Hamas did on October 7th. Well, it was pretty brutal, but they ignore the fact that there had been a war going on long before that against the Palestinians. And this is where you mentioned earlier the victors write the history. Well, we've got to take the history back, the real history. And in that context, I want to conclude by giving you a chance to talk a little bit about what the group you're working with as an anti-war group. I like the title, Make War History. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, it's this works. It definitely works in Britain. And the website is bit.ly/make war history. bit.ly/make war history. It probably will work in every single nation where the international conventions against genocide or terrorism or the funding of terrorism have been ratified into domestic law. In Britain, how it works, it is a criminal offense to pay any money to any agency that is directly or indirectly funding or facilitating genocide, crimes against humanity, acts of war, and acts of terrorism. And the British government is not exempt from the provisions of these statutes, the International Criminal Court Act and the Terrorism Act. So, and these statutes also define what is genocide, what is a war crime, what is a crime against humanity, and what is terrorism. And Britain's role in supporting the slaughter between Ukraine and Russia, in supporting the slaughter in Gaza, in supporting the slaughter in Yemen, are violations of those statutes. So there is a step-by-step process from bit.ly/make war history, whereby someone in Britain, a taxpayer like myself, can download a trust form and send it, say, to the tax authorities, local or central government tax, or whether it's a parking fine or a speeding fine or capital gains tax or corporation tax for your business, that says that the tax authority can have this money provided they can prove that none of it will be used in violation of the International Criminal Court Act or the Terrorism Act, and give them a time frame to do so. And if they fail to do so, the funds are transferred to the secondary beneficiary, which can be the original taxpayer or some other party, but not the recipient, which would be the tax authority, the government. And this is a form of legal, lawful, moral, ethical tax protest. And tax protest has a long and noble tradition of being effective because it hits them where, where it hurts most, in their pockets. Plus, plus also it means we have more money to spend on, the essentials of life, because the British government has no interest in making life affordable for us. It wants us owning nothing and eating bugs. Um, so we have more money for ourselves, and it's entirely, entirely legal. I myself have used this successfully as a protest against war. And if people may not care about war the way that I do, or they may even support a particular conflict, they can still use this process as a protest against all the draconian other pieces of legislation that this government is pushing through. bit.ly/make war history.
I was just thinking about the expose that's come out on the USAID, the amount of money that has been going essentially to CIA dirty tricks operations through this organization named the Agency for International Development. It
Yep.
develops color revolutions and regime change. And
Yep.
most people don't realize that their tax dollars are going to things of that sort.
And Harley, just on that, USAID gave $15 million to the Pakistan Electoral Commission to support the current regime from rigging the election to ensure that Imran Khan's party didn't get in. And
Yeah.
why the CIA and the MI6 don't want Imran Khan's party? Because on the day that the Ukraine-Russia war broke out, Imran Khan, then Prime Minister, said we need to have a peaceful negotiated settlement. He was on his way to Russia to negotiate a gas deal and a grain deal, and he just refused to side with the Western powers in their war against Russia. He said, no, we need to have peace. Now, you can't have former colonies acting in such an upstart, independent manner, advocating for peace. They have to toe the imperial line.
Well, and what we're seeing now is an anti colonial rebellion internationally built on the tradition of the non aligned nations and the longer tradition, the American Revolution. And the American people have to reclaim that anti colonial position. That we were the first major anti colonial success. And we've had a fight over that for many, many years, but that's another topic we can take up some other time. But Rich, thanks so much for joining me today. I think this has been very interesting, and we'll post the various links where people can find you. You're doing a lot of interviews, aren't you now?
Yeah, yes. I mean, I started off as a crypto channel. At some point, I think, oh, I need to do more crypto. But life has got far too interesting politically. So
Yeah.
yes, I do interviews, and I have you on once a month, which I'm for your smart analysis, which I'm cheered and grateful for. Cheered by and grateful for.
Okay. Well, thanks, Rich, and we'll post this, and I'll send you a link.
Thank you very, very much. Thank you, Harley.